So I just stumbled upon another Linux distro that I'm really excited about. This is Devuan Linux. So this is a fork of Debian, which you guys might know either as the granddaddy of Linux distros because so many other distros are based off of it, especially the JustWorks distros, or you might know it as the super stable corporate Linux distro, or at least one of them, because for example, I work with Debian at my real job. It's what most of our servers run. But as you can see at the top of their main page here, which is devon.org, by the way, Devuan is a GNU plus Linux fork of Debian without SystemD, which I really appreciate because virtually every Linux distro that's out there ships with SystemD. And it's gotten to the point where if you want to use a different init system without merging your current Linux configuration from SystemD to something else, which a lot of the time can actually break your distro, but if you want a different default init system, you have to go with something like Gentoo or Slack or Artix. Those are the only ones that I can think of off the top of my head that give you a choice of init systems, but none of those distros are noob friendly. They all take a while to set up, especially Gentoo if you own a low-powered PC. So Devuan might be the answer for Linux novices who want to try out a different init system. So the current stable release is Beowulf, which ships with XFCE as the main desktop environment and sysv init as the default init system, which admittedly I'm not that familiar with, so I might learn a little bit of something from making this video. And there's a few different versions of Beowulf. So you've got the desktop live, that's their default one that ships with XFCE and sysv init, as I mentioned already. There's the net install, which is basically the minimal option. So this is what you would pick if you wanted to configure your system in an Arch or Gentoo-like manner. There's a server install, which allows you to do an offline setup with XFCE, Mate, or Cinnamon. And there's also a desktop option, which is quite a bit bigger, but it comes with several desktop environments that are already on it. So that would be handy for people that don't have internet at home, but they need to get a desktop up and running. So that's enough introduction. Let's get right into the VirtualBox setup. So we're going to do a new machine, and we're going to call it Devuan. And for the type, we're going to choose Linux, and we'll just do Debian, because obviously it's similar enough to Debian. It is a fork of Debian after all. We'll give it about 4 gigs of RAM. Create a virtual hard disk, VDI, fixed size. Make it about 20 gigs. And let's go into the settings now. Crank it up to 2 processor threads. We'll make the hard disk boot first so that we don't have to change our settings around after we install it. Crank up the video memory. Change this to VBox VGA. That'll give me the best chance of it being full screen. And we'll choose Devuan that I already downloaded. So you can see 1.13 gigs is the ISO size for the regular XFCE. Pretty small. All right, I think that covers everything. Let's start it up. And I gotta drag it over from the other screen. Let's go full screen mode. All right, so we're gonna boot into the live CD. This is the first time in a while that I've even seen sysv init starting up. Looks very similar to OpenRC. All right, it's starting up now. Almost seems like it's a little slow to start. Okay, so let's see. Do I have my 16.9? I do. So let's set that real quick. All right, and that worked flawlessly. So we have this live installer where, of course, you can do everything you want to do. Oh, that's interesting that it comes with Mutt as the email client. But we'll just go ahead and get into the install. So there's an installation guide here, which is interesting. Why don't we take a look at this? All right, so this is actually kind of long. Thought that this would just be kind of a just works distro. All right, you know what? Let's just do it without the installation guide. Because, you know, if I want to approach this from the way that a noob would, right? I don't think a noob is really going to want to read an installer guide. So let's just see if I can figure it out. Okay, so we do have a GUI installation. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, continue. Grub PC is not installed, but you booted in BIOS mode. Okay, continue. Installation options. Okay, so let's see. Is there anything that I want to change here? I think the defaults are pretty good. Disable automatic login at desktop. Yeah, this looks good here. Of course, you have the option to encrypt if you want to. All right, so this is telling me you need to have at least one partition ready for the installation. Oh, so I guess it doesn't do an automatic partitioning for you. You have to use one of these options. Okay. Well, that makes it a little bit more complicated, but let's do gparted, because that's the option that a newbie would choose, even though I personally am not a huge fan of gparted. So let me see. I think I go up to partition new. Oh no, I have to create a partition table first. Okay, create partition table. GPT, yeah, that makes sense. Apply. Okay, and then we'll do a new partition. Okay, so it automatically does the full size, ext4. I don't see an option to toggle a boot flag here. Let's see. No, that formats it. I actually see a manage flags option here, but it's grayed out. So do I have to apply this and then I can make it bootable? Okay, got it. Just can't do everything at once. All right, so we'll make it boot. Okay, and I would do BIOS scrub if I was doing an EFI system, but I just did regular VirtualBox, so this should work for it. Okay, so we'll close that. And okay, so I should be able to exit gparted. So that wasn't too bad. It's kind of annoying that you have to do this, that it doesn't just have something inside of the installer here, but, you know, makes it a little bit less accessible. Okay. Please close any application running. Okay, proceed with the installation. Okay, so now we choose where we're at. I'm in America. And let's see, so they don't have New York. I guess Cambridge Bay. It's actually a little bit more accurate. Okay, yeah, so that's just telling me about the disks. Okay, locale, does it have my locale already picked? Where is, oh, okay, ENUS. All right, so yeah, my locale is checked. Yep, that looks good. Keyboard. Sure. It's probably fine. Keyboard layout. Yep, that works. Okay, that looks good. And yes, continue anyway. So it's a mix of a GUI installation and terminal installation. Well, one part is terminal installation so far, just hitting that yes. So, you know, it's not as straightforward as I thought it would be. I mean, it's not complicated, right? It's not Gentoo, it's not Arch Linux. I think a noob could figure this out, especially somebody who's installed like Windows 7 or earlier, because they kind of have a different area that you go into within those versions of Windows where you actually have to go and partition your disk, and you kind of have to do that manually. Like, it doesn't really do it for you. So yeah, this is something that I guess older noobs might be able to figure out. But if you're someone who's like just used to Windows 10, or like if you're the kind of person that actually ask Geek Squad to install Windows 10 for you, then you might have a bad time with this. This might be a little bit too complicated. So I'm going to pause the video while this installer does its thing, and we'll come back when Devuan's installed. All right, so we're not quite done with the installation yet. I just unpaused because there's this extra step that came up about installing the bootloader. And this is another one of those things, like if you're new to Linux, you might just click continue on this, but your system won't actually boot if you don't do the correct thing here. So what we need to do is copy the files to where they need to go. And then it gives you another like terminal configuration for configuring grub PC. And so we're just going to do that on dev SDA. And I think I can hit enter. Okay, and then it does its thing. And now we can choose our hostname and username. Sure, we'll leave that as the hostname. Permit sudo for new user. Okay, and then we'll enter our root password. And then a user password. Okay, and now we can reboot the system. So this should boot us right into the hard drive since I made that the first boot option. Yep. I think that was kernel version 4.9 that I saw. So yeah, this is based off of Debian. It's on a much older kernel. All right, so we're here on the desktop now. And it does have a really professional looking layout, I gotta say that. I really like this just red default desktop wallpaper. I could honestly see this being used as like the default OS in corporate environment, right? Just have everybody using this, or even in like a library, right? It kind of gives me those vibes, right? School library computers. So yeah, we got XFCE, we got our panel at the top. Let's take a look at our terminal. So yeah, let's just confirm that kernel version. Yeah, it's 4.19. But again, that makes sense because this is based on Debian stable. Everything on here is going to be a little bit older just because if you upgrade to the latest and greatest, a lot of the time things can break. Let's take a look at, well, our web browser. For one, I actually wonder what browser it is. Okay, yeah, it's Firefox, makes sense. And this is probably going to be the ESR version of Firefox, right? Yep, so that's version 68, the extended support release, again, because if you upgrade to Like I think Firefox is on version 82. If you do that, some things might break. Not always a great idea. Let's go through the applications menu and see what we got. So we have Clipman. It's going to be a clipboard manager. We've got Mousepad. I don't think I've ever heard of this. So this is a text editor. Okay. Interesting. I mean, yeah, edits text. Pretty straightforward. Screenshot utility. Thunar is the file manager. Oh, we have Vim. This is actually one of the things that annoys me about a lot of other distros, especially JustWorks distros, is that they don't include Vim by default. And Vim is a big deal, right? Like if you actually work in IT or network engineering like I do, anytime that you need to edit a file that is on a remote server somewhere over SSH, you're probably going to be using Vim to do that. That's actually the reason why I decided to really learn Vim and I guess get good at Vim, is because I had to use that every time I was SSHing, and I was like, you know, it doesn't really make sense for me to be using, I think Sublime Text is the IDE that I was using a couple of years ago. It doesn't make sense to constantly switch between those two different things that have different key bindings, so I might as well just get really good at Vim. And so that's what I use full time. So that's cool that we don't have to install that. I actually wonder, do we have htop installed? No. So let's install htop and see if we can get a fingerprinting of this system done. Because I'm curious what a XFCE, well, I know what Gentoo uses when it's XFCE and nothing else. I want to say it's around 300 megs even. So let's see what Devuan can do. And yeah, it's about the same thing, 361. It is a binary distro, so you know, the binaries on here are probably a little bit more bloated. And let's see if we go for the tree view. So you can see, indeed, we do not have SystemD as our init system. We have sysv init as our init system. So that is pretty cool. These programs on the desktop, smaller fonts and larger fonts, wonder what, okay, so you just click on them and they make the fonts larger or smaller. Let's see, does it do that on my terminal as well? No, it's literally just everything but the terminal, everything but your typed out fonts. So I guess that makes a little bit of sense. LibreOffice Math under Education. Let's see, under Graphics, LibreOffice Draw, Internet. We already took a look at that. And yeah, so I mentioned this earlier, but it's got Mutt as the this is the email client. So Mutt is basically a terminal-based email client for those of you that didn't know. But honestly, I don't think that this is really a good idea for noobs because configuring Mutt can be a little bit difficult. There are tools out there that you can download from GitHub that basically configure Mutt for you. But again, like the whole concept of going to GitHub and grabbing some tool and configuring things in the terminal, all of that isn't very newbie friendly. I think it would make a lot more sense to have Thunderbird as the default email client. I think that would be more reasonable. So multimedia, we have, what is this? Paroli media player? I don't think I've ever heard of this. Okay, that's an interesting choice. Surprised that they don't use MPV. So for Office, you've got the LibreOffice suite. And again, it's probably an older version. Yeah, 6.1.5.2, but again, whole reason for doing that is just to keep everything as stable as possible. You don't want to update your system all the time. Updates are a conspiracy that are made to break your system. So I also mentioned that you can actually choose which init system you want to use. So like, for example, I should be able to install OpenRC. Yeah, so it gives you the option of installing OpenRC. I'm actually curious, could you install SystemD if you wanted to? It doesn't look like you can. Okay, so if you choose Devuan as your Linux distro, you are not going to use systemd. Like, you don't have a choice. Okay, well, you do have a choice between OpenRC, run it, or sysvinit, but not systemd. If you want to use that bullcrap, you go install Debian or any of the 99,000 other Linux distros that exist out there. But on Devuan, we don't do that. We only do good init systems. I'm actually curious how many packages are installed on here. So let's sudo apt list installed and then pipe that into word count. Okay, 1587. That's not bad. It's not too bad at all. I mean, that sounds like a pretty normal Debian setup. So I installed htop. Is there like an actual built-in? Okay, there is a built-in task manager. So let's see what this one says. Okay, yeah, not a bad task manager, but again, I prefer htop. That's just much nicer. And I'll make a point about this because I always like to make a point about this whenever I'm comparing Linux to Windows or Linux to distros that use a more bloated setup like GNOME. We've got Firefox open, and we're only at about 577 megs of RAM. So not a whole lot of bloat that's going on here. It also helps that systemd isn't in use because systemd is one of the more bloated init systems that are out there. So let's see, what else is there to take a look at? Of course, you can edit this panel. In fact, there is one thing I'm actually going to edit. This seems a little weird that they would write out applications menu here. Because like it's so long, like it just makes the button so big. Like you could make this say, you know, app menu. That would be more reasonable. Or just show the icon, right? Like you don't actually need. I feel like this would be obvious to anybody who's using it. Like, okay, this is the applications menu. Let's see how difficult it is to customize this for anybody that doesn't really like the default look. Let's see, desktop settings. Okay, so you can change the wallpaper here. Is that actually? Yeah, I don't think you'd want to use Debian wallpaper. You want to signal to people that you are too smart for Debian. So let's see, is there anything that does that? Okay, these are just repositions of the same thing. And it looks like they have like a gray one. Okay. I think the red one is pretty good. Let's see, menu. Everything's fine there. Can increase the icon size. Good for people who can't see as well. Okay, so this probably has like the regular XFCE configuration. Okay, I think it's just this, settings manager. So let's see, appearance. Let's see, which one of these looks good? This one looks pretty modern. I kind of like that. Let's see, is there one that gives me a red bar? Okay, we'll just go with the more modern looking one. Let's see, icons. No. Is there a dark mode that's already installed on here? That's what I'd be a bit more interested in. Window manager tweaks. Let's see, it wasn't under here. Desktop. Yeah, it's just the background panel. That's not going to be it. These are some interesting looking screensavers. Yeah, it wasn't here. Okay, I don't think that there is a dark mode that's installed by default. There's displays, so this is where you would manage your displays, and you can set your resolution here. So you don't have to do it through the terminal like I did. Well, actually, I didn't even have to change anything after I had it installed. It automatically knew to do 1920 by 1080, which is pretty nice. Yeah, so I don't think there's a dark mode on here. Alright, so I've been in this distro for about 20 minutes now. You know, it's pretty okay. Like, I like the fact that it doesn't come with SystemD, you know? The fact that if you want to use a different init system, this is a pretty easy intro to it. I think that the installer could be simplified a bit more, because there were definitely some steps where, you know, I had to kind of stop and read, which I know people are going to say, oh, well, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to read the instructions when you do it. But you got to understand, that's not what most people do. Most people, they want to just jump right into their technology. They don't want to read a manual to figure out how to do it. So if that could be simplified a bit more, then I would say that this is definitely an easy, noob-friendly, just works distro. But if you can figure out the installer, then you're good to go. I mean, this has, you know, it has everything that you would basically need to just use a system. You know, it's got a browser, it's got an office suite. It's not bloated, so this is definitely going to be a good option for anybody that's trying to breathe new life into an older system. Like if you got a laptop that's many, many years old, maybe it's only got a couple of gigs of RAM in it, go ahead and slap Devuan on it. It's only going to idle at about, you know, between 300 and 400 megs of RAM. Not bad at all. It's going to make your system really snappy. I could also see this being a good option to use on servers. Like I said, at my job, we use Debian on most of our servers because it's just really stable. You know, it's a well-known Linux distro for those kind of uses. And I could definitely see Devuan being used instead of it. You know, only real difference is that it's got sysv init as your default init system as opposed to systemd. I don't think that would create any huge issues for us. There might be some slight modifications we would have to make to the scripts that we use on it. But yeah, this could totally be used in a corporate environment, or it could be used as a home desktop system. I suggest you try it out, especially if you don't want to take the plunge into Gentoo or Slack or Artix, any of those distros that are a bit more difficult to configure in order to use something other than systemd. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Have a great one.